I didn't cry when the invitation arrived. I didn't raise my voice or storm out or call my sister to ask if it was a mistake. I just stared at the words for a while, then quietly walked to the kitchen and placed the envelope in the trash, right between a crumpled grocery list and a cracked eggshell. The invitation was beautiful. Heavy cardstock with gold trim, soft ivory tone, our family crest embossed at the top like a seal of approval I hadn't asked for. Everything about it screamed elegance. Everything except the line that changed everything. Adults only 18 and over strictly enforced. I read it 3 times, then a 4th, hoping my eyes were wrong. But it was there. Bold. Icy. Final. Behind me, Sophie was sitting at the table, bent over her math homework, earbuds in, pencil tapping rhythmically on the wood. The sun was catching the highlights in her dark hair. She looked up at just the right moment. Maybe she saw something shift in my face. Maybe she just felt it and pulled one earbud out. "What's wrong?" she asked. I hesitated, swallowing the weight in my throat. "It's an adults-only wedding," I said, keeping my voice calm. She blinked, confused. "So, I can't go." I shook my head slowly. Sophie looked at me for a long moment. Then, with the kind of quiet that makes your stomach drop, she asked, "Is it because I'm adopted?" That one sentence cracked something inside me. Not because she asked, but because she didn't sound surprised, just resigned. Like it was a truth she'd long suspected and had only been waiting for confirmation. "No," I said too quickly. "Of course not." But she didn't look convinced. And honestly, I wasn't either. My name is Diana Whitmore. I'm a family therapist. I spend my days helping people name their feelings, understand their patterns, rebuild broken things. But in that moment, all I could do was stand there helpless while my daughter, tucked her hurt away like she had practiced doing it. Sophie came into my life when she was 3. Big eyes, small voice. She clung to a stuffed elephant for months and wouldn't speak more than a whisper to anyone but me. The first time she called me Mom, I cried in my car for 20 minutes. I remember gripping the steering wheel and sobbing into the leather, overwhelmed by what that one word meant. From that moment on, I made her a promise. She would never feel unwanted again. Not in my house, not in my family, not anywhere I could protect her. And for a while, I thought I was keeping that promise. I brought her to holidays, birthdays, weddings, baby showers. I made sure she was dressed nicely. I coached her to be polite, to smile, to help in the kitchen. I thought if I kept showing up, if we kept participating, eventually everyone else would see what I saw. That she was mine. Fully, irrevocably, unconditionally. But the wedding invitation made it clear. They didn't see her the way I did. And worse, maybe they never would. I didn't argue. I didn't call Madison, my sister, to ask why. I didn't demand an exception. I just went online that night, clicked RSVP, and selected not attending. Then I turned off my phone and sat beside Sophie on the couch. We didn't talk about it. She didn't ask. I didn't offer. Instead, we watched reruns of an old baking show and ate leftover lasagna out of mismatched bowls. But as she laughed at the screen and licked sauce off her spoon, I kept thinking about that invitation and the years before it. All the tiny moments I'd dismissed. All the small slights I'd excused. All the times I'd told myself, they'll come around. They just need more time. I was wrong. This wasn't about time. This was about truth. And the truth was, Sophie had never truly been welcomed, not by them. And for the first time in 17 years, I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. It wasn't just the invitation. That was only the final, unmistakable line in a much longer pattern. A pattern I had spent years trying to overlook, justify, or soften with benefit of the doubt. The truth is, Sophie had been collecting small wounds for as long as she'd been part of our family. Quiet injuries, the kind that don't leave bruises, only silence. I remember one Easter. We arrived at my parents' house with homemade carrot cupcakes Sophie had insisted on baking. She was maybe 9, wearing a yellow dress and carrying a little tray with pink frosting proudly balanced in her hands. Inside, all the grandkids had personalized Easter baskets, embroidered names, themed treats, little tags with poems. Except Sophie's. Hers was a plastic bucket. Happy Spring, it said in generic block letters. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, holding it like it might fall apart if she breathed too hard. Then she smiled politely and said thank you. That smile haunted me for days. Another time, she had drawn a picture of our family, me, my husband Mark, and herself, using crayons and watercolor. She gave it to my mom, proud and hopeful. My mother said thank you, placed it on the table, and left it there. Hours later, it was curled at the edges, half covered by a catalog. That night, Sophie asked why her drawing wasn't on the fridge like her cousin's. I didn't have an answer that felt honest, so I mumbled something about space and magnets and changed the subject. But I knew what she felt. I just wasn't ready to admit it. And it wasn't just my parents. Madison, my younger sister, had a way of referring to Sophie as your daughter, never by name, never my niece. Just a subtle shift in language, like Sophie was someone's neighbor's kid tagging along. At family dinners, Sophie would offer to help. She's always been that kind of person, quiet but eager to be useful. Once, she stood in the kitchen, holding a bowl of salad while the adults bustled around her, never acknowledging she was even there. Eventually, she just placed the bowl on the counter and walked out. She didn't say anything, but I saw it, the slump in her shoulders, the way she sat quietly on the porch alone afterward, legs folded under her, looking out at the garden. And the worst part, I told myself they just didn't notice, that they were busy, that if I reminded them more often, if I smiled hard enough, explained long enough, they'd eventually get it. But people don't forget to see someone who matters to them. They only forget when they never truly saw them in the first place. Sophie's hurt wasn't loud. It didn't come with yelling or confrontation. It came with withdrawal, with fading into the background so she wouldn't disrupt the narrative. It came with questions like, do you think they like me? And should I stay in the car until dinner starts? It came with hesitating before entering a room full of family. And I enabled it, not intentionally, but by trying to keep the peace. I made my daughter shoulder the burden of invisibility, because I thought being accepted by my family meant we had to be easy. We had to be gracious. We had to overlook the uncomfortable parts. But Sophie was never the uncomfortable part. Their unwillingness to make space for her, that was the discomfort. She's 17 now, articulate, sharp, compassionate to a fault. She reads more books in a month than I do in a year, sketches people she meets at coffee shops, and makes the best banana muffins you'll ever taste. She doesn't demand attention, but she deserves to be seen. And yet, every time we stepped into a family gathering, I watched her brace herself, smile on cue, laugh at half-heard jokes, accept generic gifts without flinching. She learned early that politeness was safer than honesty, that being easy was more palatable than being present. And I let it happen. But that wedding invitation, that was the moment it all crystallized. This wasn't about an age limit. It never was. It was about drawing a line and showing us exactly where we stood. On the outside, the next morning, my phone lit up with a text from Madison. Hey, just saw your RSVP. Is everything okay? I stared at it for a few minutes, then put the phone down without replying. A few hours later, another message. If this is about the age thing, I hope you understand. We're being super consistent with everyone. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. That phrase echoed in my head like a cruel joke. Because how could it not be personal when it was about my daughter? Sophie wasn't a coworker's kid. She wasn't someone's +1 or a distant second cousin. She was Madison's niece, my daughter, and she wasn't a child. She was 17, old enough to drive, to work, to vote in 1 year. Old enough to make a handmade card for Madison's engagement with tiny paper roses and silver glitter that stained our kitchen table for days. But not old enough to be included? I still didn't respond. Then came the third message, this time from Rachel, our older sister. She was always the one who tried to play mediator. Tessa said, "You're not coming. What's going on?" And then, as if on cue, my mother called. I hesitated before answering. Gloria Whitmore only calls when something is wrong, or when she wants something fixed. She doesn't call to talk. I picked up. "Diana," she said in that careful voice she uses when she wants to sound gentle but still in control. "I heard you're not going to the wedding. Is this really about the age limit?" I took a breath. Sophie wasn't invited. I'm not going without her. There was a pause. "She's almost 18, my mother said, like that proved some kind of point. "It's not like she's a little kid. She's family." I waited, thinking there might be more. An apology, maybe. Or, at the very least, some acknowledgement of how Sophie might feel. But that was it. Then she added, "Don't punish your sister over this. It's just one night." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Just one night. As if this was about an event, not a pattern. As if this hadn't been building for years. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm protecting my daughter." And then I hung up. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The group chat started buzzing. The one we used for planning holidays, birthdays, baby showers. First Rachel, "Can't believe you're making such a big deal over one rule. You always have to cause drama." Then Madison, "This isn't about Sophie. You're making it about her. Please don't do this to Mom." And finally my mother again. A long paragraph filled with phrases like family unity, forgiveness, grace, and how hard it is to be in the middle. No one asked how Sophie was doing. No one acknowledged the card she'd made, or the dress she'd been saving up for, or the hairstyle she'd been practicing in the mirror. No one mentioned her name. And that, more than the wedding, more than the texts, is what broke my heart. Sophie didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just quietly erased the photos she had saved of dresses from her phone, deleted the Pinterest board she'd made, folded the card she'd written and tucked it in a drawer. I watched her do it from the hallway, watched the way she moved, not with anger, but with something worse, with the kind of quiet that only comes from expectation. She wasn't surprised. She had already learned what I'd spent years trying not to see. They never truly saw her. And somewhere deep down, she'd stopped expecting them to. She had only hoped this time might be different. That maybe, just maybe, she could take up space, be wanted, be counted. But hopes like that are fragile. And when they break, they don't shatter, they dissolve. That evening, as we sat in silence, watching the sun disappear behind the fir trees outside, Sophie turned to me and said, "Should I just stop trying to belong?" I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know what hurt more, the question itself, or the fact that she had asked it without tears, like it was just another fact of life she needed to prepare for. In our family, Christmas had always been at my house, not because I had the biggest space or the fanciest kitchen, but because I was the one who made it happen. I cooked, I cleaned, I bought extra folding chairs, and ironed the table runner I never used the rest of the year. I wrapped gifts weeks in advance and made 3 types of cookies because no one could ever agree on a favorite. It wasn't glamorous. It was work, but it was tradition, and I told myself that mattered. That being the one who held things together made me matter. But that December, everything felt different. I didn't send a group text. I didn't plan a menu or shop for wine or dig the folding chairs out from the garage. I didn't buy ribbon or light the mantel candles. I didn't perform. I simply didn't. Mark noticed first. A week into December, he asked, "Should I go ahead and order the chairs?" I shook my head. No extra seats this year. He didn't ask why. He just nodded. He understood. Sophie didn't say anything either. She saw the unopened boxes of lights in the hallway and didn't ask if we were decorating. She saw the grocery list sitting blank on the fridge and didn't reach for a pen. She just moved through the house quietly and for the first time, peacefully. But of course, silence is never just silence in families like mine. Not when it replaces something they've come to expect. By the second week of December, the messages began trickling in. First Rachel, "Hey, are we still doing Christmas Eve at your place? Let me know what I should bring." Then Madison, "We'll be 5 again. Let me know if Sophie wants anything special this year, if she's even going to be there this time." That one nearly did it. The way she framed it, as if Sophie had chosen to miss the wedding. As if her absence was some teenage tantrum rather than deliberate exclusion. I didn't respond. Not to that, not to any of it. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for protecting my daughter. For once, I wasn't going to package pain into politeness just to keep everyone else comfortable. Still, they kept trying. My mother called. I let it ring. Rachel called next. Then Madison. I didn't pick up. Eventually, my father left a voicemail, his voice strained but calm. "Diana, we just want to know what's going on. Your mother's upset. It's not too late to do the right thing." The right thing. As if inviting people who had dismissed my daughter was some kind of moral victory. As if setting the table for those who never once saw her place at it was the high road. No, we didn't host anyone that year. Instead, the 3 of us, me, Mark, and Sophie, made lasagna in our pajamas. She cut the noodles into lopsided squares, and Mark accidentally dropped the cheese in the sink. We laughed loudly. Sophie baked sugar cookies in strange, little shapes that crumbled when we picked them up. We watched old holiday movies and yelled at the plot holes. There was no music playing from the stereo. No over-decorated centerpiece. "No, let's not talk about politics," warnings whispered before dinner. No eggshells. No glances across the room when Sophie spoke. No frozen smiles. Just us. And in that stillness, something unfamiliar settled in my chest. Something I couldn't name at first. It wasn't joy. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't even pride. It was peace. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't playing a role. I wasn't managing emotions. I wasn't pre-planning reactions or rehearsing how to make things easier for everyone else. I was just being. And Sophie? She was glowing. Not in some performative way, but in the way people do when they finally stop holding their breath. She didn't have to earn her seat at the table that night. She was the table, and the space around her was finally free of the tension we had normalized for too long. It was 2 days after Christmas. The house still smelled faintly of vanilla and garlic, a strange combination from our chaotic holiday menu. Sophie was curled up on the couch, legs tucked under a fuzzy blue blanket, sketchbook balanced on her knees. She always drew when something was too big for words. Her hands moved quietly, almost automatically, pencil shading in eyes and hair and expressions she didn't yet have language for. I was folding laundry across the room, pairing socks and smoothing pillowcases when I noticed her pause, her pencil stilled mid-gesture. She didn't look up. "If I wasn't adopted," she said softly, "do you think they'd like me more?" The question hit like a slow-breaking wave, crashing through every wall I'd built to hold myself together. I set the towel down. My hands were trembling. I crossed the room and sat beside her. For a second, I didn't speak. I didn't want to lie. I didn't want to say something neat and empty that would sound comforting, but feel hollow. "Finally," I said, "they might have pretended better, but the way they treat people who aren't like them, that was never about you." She looked at me then, not with anger, not even sadness, but with a calm that felt older than her 17 years, like she had seen everything, accepted it, and walked through it. "I don't think I want them to like me anymore," she said. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't resentful. It was just final. And it was the bravest thing I'd ever heard. There's a kind of heartbreak that comes not from rejection, but from clarity, from the realization that you were never truly wanted in the first place, and from the even deeper realization that you don't need to be. That's what Sophie had found. Not despair, but freedom. And in that moment, I stopped waiting. Stopped waiting for an apology, for an explanation, for someone to realize what they'd done. I had spent years shrinking myself to maintain peace, swallowing hurt in favor of harmony, teaching my daughter, by example, that being tolerated was enough if it kept the room from turning cold. But Sophie wasn't shrinking. She was drawing boundaries. And if she had the courage to say, "I don't need their approval," then I had the responsibility to echo her strength. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a voice message from Madison. It was carefully measured, as always. Her voice syrup-sweet. Each sentence wrapped in civility, but carrying the sharp edge of blame beneath the surface. "I just think it's sad, Diana. You always made such a big deal about how much you love Sophie, but now it feels like you're using her as a shield. Like any time someone doesn't treat her like royalty, you cut them off. That's not healthy. That's not parenting. That's obsession." I didn't listen to the rest. I didn't need to. I pressed delete. Then I blocked her number. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of a quiet knowing, like closing a door that had never really been open. Because if loving my daughter without apology is obsession, then yes, I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with showing her she never has to shrink to be safe. That she doesn't need to earn her place with politeness, with silence, with pretending not to notice when people look past her. I'm obsessed with protecting the one person who needed me the most, who had spent her entire childhood proving her worth in a family that claimed to love her, but never showed her how. And no, I don't regret it. I regret the years I stayed small for the sake of keeping the peace. I regret the holidays where she smiled while no one bothered to learn her favorite color. The birthdays where she said thank you to people who couldn't remember how old she was. The family dinners where she cleared plates from people who couldn't look her in the eye. But not anymore. Sophie doesn't ask for much. She never has. But what she needs, what she's always needed, is a mother who chooses her. Every time. And that's who I am now. Not the event planner. Not the keeper of traditions. Not the negotiator who smooths over awkward silences. I am Sophie's mother. And if that means losing people who cannot love her fully, then I will lose them. Gently, quietly, but for good. The new year came quietly. No countdown. No clinking glasses. No resolutions scribbled on a napkin. Just the three of us, me, Mark, and Sophie, sitting around the fireplace, playing a board game she got for Christmas. We were terrible at it. We forgot the rules halfway through. Mark kept making up his own. Sophie laughed so hard she spilled cider on the carpet. And I remember thinking, this is it. Not the mess, not the cider, not the game, but this, the lightness, the absence of tension, the freedom of not measuring every word, every glance, every silence. For once, I wasn't anticipating the next text, the next guilt trip, the next holiday dinner I'd have to navigate like a minefield. I was simply living, with my family, my real family, and in that quiet, something inside me settled. A part of me I didn't realize had been clenched for years finally exhaled. It was the moment I understood what I'd been mistaking for peace all along. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the absence of pretending. Looking back, there were so many moments I could have spoken louder, sooner. So many times I could have drawn the line before Sophie had to ask the questions that broke my heart. But healing doesn't always come with a grand speech. Sometimes it starts with a small choice, like not setting out extra chairs, like not answering the phone, like letting silence speak instead of explanation. And when I think about Sophie's question, "Do you think they'd like me more if I wasn't adopted?" I still feel the weight of it. I probably always will. But I'm proud of her answer. I don't think I want them to like me anymore. That wasn't bitterness. That wasn't rebellion. That was clarity. That was my daughter recognizing her worth. Refusing to beg for love that came with conditions. Refusing to contort herself into someone palatable just to be tolerated. That was her learning the most important lesson I could ever give her. Love isn't supposed to hurt. It doesn't ask you to earn your place. It doesn't disappear when you make people uncomfortable by simply existing. If you're listening to this and you've been there, if you've ever stood in that space between loyalty and self-respect, know this: it's okay to choose peace. It's okay to stop performing. It's okay to protect your child, your heart, your wholeness, even if it disappoints the people who expect you to stay small. Because the truth is, love that asks you to shrink isn't love at all. And I won't shrink anymore. Not for tradition. Not for appearances. Not for a family that never once said Sophie's name without a pause first. I won't shrink for people who saw her as an exception to be tolerated, rather than a person to be cherished. I will choose her, again and again, with my whole heart, without apology. I'll choose the girl who drew our family in crayon and signed it, us. I'll choose the teenager who bakes cookies in strange shapes and knows how to sit with other people's sadness. I'll choose the young woman who had the courage to say, enough. I'll choose her even when it means losing everyone else. Because that's what love does. Real love doesn't flinch. It doesn't ask for silence. It doesn't say, don't make it a big deal. It says you matter. You always have. And I'll make space for you, even when others won't. And so, for anyone out there trying to hold it all together, trying to keep the peace at the cost of your soul, you don't have to anymore. You can choose different. You can choose better. You can choose love, even if it means starting over. Even if it means choosing one chair at a table over 20. Because that one chair, filled with someone who feels seen, safe, and loved, is worth more than all the folding chairs in the world.